We're on Chapter 15, Learners with Special Gifts and Talents. Let's start off with some preliminary basic facts about your brain. You've probably heard these in human growth and development, or maybe in biology class, or if you've taken some kind of anatomy class. You've probably heard some of these things, but anyway, your brain is shaped kind of like a large walnut that you can see in this picture. Of course, this brain is dyed blue, but anyway, about as big maybe as a grapefruit. Weighs about 3 pounds, takes up about 2% of your body weight, but it uses about 20% of your calories, which is fairly significant. Think of that, 3 pounds of your body, but it's using 1/5 of the calories you consume every day, because, of course, it has to run the rest of the body. There are some parts of the brain that you're going to need to be familiar with because you just might see them on a test. So we're going to talk about some of those in more detail. Amygdala, the hypothalamus, hippocampus, thalamus. We're not as concerned about that one. But anyway, these three in the front, important to learning and memory. So if you have damage to one of these, it's a lot harder to learn. The thalamus, notice everything except smell goes there first. And then it's sent to the other parts of the brain for processing. So in other words, it receives vision, hearing, touch, taste, all those things that your senses may interact with or contact go to the thalamus first. The amygdala is the almond-shaped part of your brain in the front, and it registers things like pleasure or fear or rage. So if someone has an injury to this part of their head, the person may be very fearful, may get angry very easily, or may really be into inducing pleasure to themselves, something like abusing drugs or alcohol or something like that. They're trying to stimulate their brain that way. The hippocampus there, learning, that's where most of your learning takes place. And it decides, okay, is this something long-term we need to save it to the hard drive of our brain? Or is this something we're just going to store temporarily? And if you're trying to get something in the hard drive of your brain, as I like to call it, it may take you a few days. It takes you a few days to learn new material and to retain it, to remember it, to put it all together. Think of something like learning a new math procedure. The teacher may have explained it to you in school one day. You did a couple of practice problems. Then more explanation the next day. Maybe people had to come up to the board and solve it on a smart board or a chalkboard or dry erase board or whatever you had in your classroom. And then you had what? Homework. Oh, joy, oh, rapture. Oh boy, I remember sitting and having to do so many math problems at night. And that was not my favorite thing to do, but that was to help you get these steps and procedures kind of ingrained in the brain, as I like to say, so that when you encounter it in the future, you can know the steps and remember those and solve that kind of problem. The cerebrum is the biggest part of your brain, and these are the different lobes of it, and each part does something different. Give example, time, okay, vision. You don't have to know all of these now, but you should realize that vision, back part of the brain. So if you have a head injury where your head slams back against something, that's why you might say, I see stars. Okay? Frontal lobe, you may remember this is the last part of the brain to develop in people. That's your impulse control. Okay? That is why, as you probably learned in Human Growth and Development or Education 300 or some other psychology class, your auto insurance rates may be so high because people tend to be more impulsive up through about age 25, and they tend to drive faster and do riskier behaviors. So car insurance people know that, and your rates are higher because you're more likely to have an accident. Oh my goodness. So wow, brain research shows this. Cerebrum, again, frontal part of the brain, what's called executive function. We're very big on talking about executive function in my class and Dr. Franklin's and Dr. Bones, when you have her. We talk a lot about that. The control, the locus of control in the brain, and the frontal lobe of the brain. And that's where your higher order thinking skills are, where you learn to solve and process things, and it goes through into other parts of the brain too, but it's where you learn self-control. Hence, if a person is in an accident where they have a brain injury to the front of the brain, they may not be able to control their behavior as much as they did before. And I knew a young fellow like that one time who was in a car accident, and he was not able to control what he said verbally as much after that accident, although he did regain a lot of and retain a lot of his personality, which I found very wonderful. And he was a real interesting young fellow to talk to at the time. The cerebellum, that part of your brain, handles gross fine motor tasks. Again, if you have an injury back here, what's that going to affect? Your motor skills. The ability for you to do certain things. And which one of these is fine motor? If you said tying shoes, you're correct. Gross motor, then obviously playing tennis, moving the large muscles of the body, arms, legs more, even though you have some fine motor and holding the racket and maneuvering it different ways. Remember this picture from Education 313? Your brain cells. And the fact that your brain has kind of electrical impulses. Okay, you have the nucleus of the brain. It fires off. This goes out through the dendrites. It goes along the axon, and then it goes to another brain cell, and it moves on through your brain, and that's how you learn or remember, or what makes you respond to some stimulus that might be out there. The myelin sheath, you might recall, is sort of a protective coating for the nerves, for the axon. And one thing they've discovered in people who have Alzheimer's is the myelin sheath seems to be going away in the person's brain, or it seems to not be there as much, and that's just something they've noted. Brainstem, that's what's also known as the reptilian part of your brain. It controls basic things like your ability to breathe, your heart functioning, messages getting around to your body. You don't have to sit and consciously say to yourself, breathe, 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 do you? No, of course not. That brainstem just automatically tells your body to do that. Most people have a preference as to which brain hemisphere they use the most, the left or the right. Okay, the left hemisphere of the brain controls things on the right side of the body, and also these other skills. For instance, being able to sequence things or analyze things in depth, that's controlled by the left side of the brain. Being aware of time and how much time you have left, or that something's going to happen pretty soon, that's also in the left hemisphere of the brain. Your ability to use spoken language correctly, and your questioning about things, your curiosity. Those are things that are usually housed in the left hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere of the brain then controls the left side of the body. And your spatial skills. Spatial skills, of course, being your ability to put parts together to make a whole, for instance, a puzzle, okay, or packing a suitcase. The ability to get things neatly in a suitcase, and to get a lot in one suitcase if possible to avoid those extra airline baggage fees. That's become a really important thing over the last few years. Your ability to process the big picture of things, okay, and interpret body language of other people. Also your ability to think abstractly about things and see the big picture of things and be creative. Most people have one hemisphere or the other that is stronger, but messages go back and forth in your brain all the time, provided you have no kind of brain damage. Now, click on this and read what's said about gifted children and how sometimes some of them are at risk out in school or in the community because of things that may or may not happen for them, which is pretty unfortunate. And then come back and go to slide 17. Giftedness. Most people tend to be better at one thing than another, and of course we call those things our strengths. You have things you're better at than I am, and I may have something I'm really good at that you're not, and that's okay. God made us all differently, and what a blessing. Wouldn't it be boring if we all had the same strengths? I think it would. Let's look at some of those, and these should be kind of familiar with you. You've probably heard of Howard Gardner before, right? Howard Gardner in his studies of giftedness, and these are some of the main categories that he talks about. If you are good in these areas, then you may have good verbal linguistic skills. What kind of job might you get if you're good in these areas? If you're thinking of things like being a salesperson, being a writer, being a teacher, being an interpreter, yes. Now that doesn't mean that you have to be able to learn other languages very easily to have good verbal skills. No, but it can often make it easier to do that. Next one, bodily kinesthetic. People who have good bodily kinesthetic skills are usually good athletes. They're good with movement, dancing, modeling. And I'd like to draw your attention to this young fellow over here. I happen to know his mother. And he was in the Charleston Fashion Show a couple of years ago. His mother is a singer in this area of some note. And if you ask me about her, I'll tell you a little bit about her. His mom was actually on the show American Idol back a number of years ago and went to my elementary school. So ask me about that, and I'll love to tell you. People with good visual spatial skills are good at putting things together, and I give you the examples again of packing, putting puzzles together, visualizing how something could look. So what would that kind of person be able to do in a career? Think about things like being an engineer. That'd be a good one. Or being an architect. Okay? You can take parts and visualize how a building will look if you design it a certain way. And of course you have to have a lot of training and know about stress loads and things like that. That'd be a really good career for someone who's good in that skill area. Then there's the mathematical area. And most people know if they're good in math or not. Usually if you ask them, they can tell you right away, yeah, I like math. And people who are very, very gifted in math don't understand how other people don't, to put quotes around it, get it. They're like, but it's so easy. You follow the steps and you solve the problem. But people who do not find math to be their strength don't get it that easily. Well, there are lots of little tips out there for teachers, and this is just one that I think you'll enjoy. So click on this YouTube video and follow it through all the way to the end and let me know what you think about it and see if it's something that you might be able to use in your classroom one day to keep kids interested. Another area on slide 22 is naturalistic. People who have good naturalistic skills are often good with keeping things in order, classifying things. What are some careers? Well, you can see some here. Animal husbandry, being a vet. Police officers even are good at classifying things like cars, people, putting things in categories. This is normal for the light to be on in this building, or this is not normal. Let me check and see if someone's broken in, or did they forget to lock the door when they came out, or what's going on here. Someone like this lady who's a forest ranger. Those are all skill areas that someone with good naturalistic skills might excel in. Then we have one that's a little bit harder to understand, I think. Existentialism. And there's the old joke about, people sitting around and pondering their navel and trying to decide what is the meaning of life and so forth. But if you click on the link there, you'll see a little bit more of an explanation about existentialism. And of course, folks who are really into that may be good philosophers. Sometimes politicians, though politicians tend to have better verbal skills, just depending. But people who do a lot of writing or in esoteric kind of ways, those are folks who usually are very into existentialism. Another one that was added more recently, spiritual skills. People who are very centered in their being. They're thoughtful. They're focused on God. They're focused on their spiritual beliefs. And as we have seen in the news, this can be a good thing, or sometimes it can be a negative if someone is just way out there on the fringe of whatever their religion might be. To the fact that they think that anyone who doesn't believe how they do is very wrong, or is going to hell, or should be killed. And genocide, murders, things like that have happened. Hopefully you recognize one of the people in this picture, this gentleman over here, Reverend Billy Graham. Of course, he's someone who definitely has great spiritual gifts and was able to preach to millions of people, not just on television, but worldwide, touring all over the world to try to help spread the good love and good news of Jesus Christ and help people come to know him. And over here is a nun who happens to be, of course, of the Catholic faith. And people like this dedicate their entire lives to serving God in whatever way they feel he's called them to do. And so spiritual gifts are indeed very important. Some people are good in moral decision making. Well, teachers, when it comes to teaching a moral value, some people say, well, whose moral is it? What's good for you? Is that what you do? Or do you do what's good for other people? Then you have a moral dilemma. Some of you might remember Kohlberg's levels of moral development, again, from back in 300 or 313. And Kohlberg said that we should move toward doing what is better for mankind, not always just what is better for us, but what is good for society as a whole. And that gifted people who are intellectually, academically gifted in certain areas should strive to do things that will help society as a whole. Interpersonal skills, and you see some future Teacher Society members here from a couple of years ago down at the Heart Walk at the Battery in Charleston. People with good interpersonal skills are usually kind of social. They're good at listening to others, and people often come to them. If you're the kind of person that, let's say you live here in the dorm and other people come to you a lot for advice or want to know what you think about a topic or an issue, maybe you have good interpersonal skills and they trust you. And usually, you're in a good mood most of the time, and they think that you're an honest person and fair, and you have good intentions toward others. Those are good interpersonal skills to have, especially when you're out in the workplace. And in personal relationships as well. The next one is intrapersonal skills. A person who understands himself or herself, and here you'll see a couple others, School of Ed candidates, one of whom's played on our Buccaneer football team before for a couple years. But you know what your strengths are, and you're willing to do things that play on your strengths. For instance, Isaac Lawrence here is a very social kind of guy. He has good interpersonal skills, but he also is willing to go out and do things for others. He's a good example of someone who has good interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. And Cynthia Rooney's out there too, and what they're doing is painting Go Red dresses, which we do every year, usually around February, to let people know about women's heart health. It's an activity that you might enjoy in the spring semester. Excuse me. Some of you may have good musical or rhythmic skills. If you're good at dancing, you're good at playing musical instruments, or you can compose songs, you're a good singer, then that may be your strength. What about you? What are your strengths? Do you have areas in which you could improve? And if so, what would you need to do to improve? Something to think about. We'll talk about some of that in class.